If you've ever felt like running a short-term rental business is rocket science, my guest today might be the only person qualified to agree with you. Cody Wood is an aerospace engineer turned fractional COO who is applying literal engineering systems to the chaotic world of hospitality. While most of us are trying to keep the lights on, Cody is out there taking businesses from an 11K monthly loss to a 10K monthly profit in just 15 days. He's the guy you call when you want to stop playing host and start running a machine in your business. Cody, welcome. You started your career in engineering in the aerospace industry, and then you worked your way somehow into the short-term rental space. And to me, those have like no correlation, and it's kind of crazy that you made that transition. You've become a trusted operator here from the aerospace engineer all the way over. Can you tell me a little bit about how that happened? Like, tell me about that journey and what made you go into the short-term rental industry?
Yeah, so basically 5 years ago, when COVID happened, I was working as a defense engineer, R&D manager, actually designing new products, and I basically was traveling globally. So I actually moved states with my wife and was traveling internationally. Was working probably anywhere between 80 to 120 hours a week. So not a ton of time, free time, and I felt like I was just constantly under stress and pressure. And we had just bought a house north of Houston, Texas, and we were looking at ways where, excuse me, I was looking at ways to take my property and use it, turn it from a liability to an asset. And so a lot of people in this industry, we talk about house hacking. That is exactly what I was looking at for Airbnb. I had a 3 bedroom, 2 bath, two spare bedrooms, wasn't using them, no kids at the time. And installed a smart lock, and that was my start to my Airbnb journey in a way. And so then I realized there was so much more to this industry. And I had the opportunity to leave my position and spoke with my wife, and we both agreed like you don't get many of these chances to kind of like just completely do a 180. And this was one of those times where we're like, all right, let's go head first and see what happens. And so I actually partnered with a guy that had 75 properties. He had 2 cell phones that he was constantly on. He was stressed, basically running at the time, the software was called Smart B&B. You now know it as Hospitable. And it was not a PMS at the time. It was just automated messaging. He had one VA he had just brought on a few weeks prior to me, and he was stressed. I mean, he was under a lot of pressure and stress and just trying to keep up and keep, treading water and keeping his head above water. As I stepped in, I was kind of looking at his finances. My goal was actually to help him with marketing, which is funny because also when you hear like an engineer that flips to go to marketing sounds even more crazy. But in my corporate world, I was actually helping the marketing teams a lot, giving them posts that people wanted to see. And I was like, I think I have a knack for this because I understand what the customer wants. And so I was thinking, well, maybe I'll try my hand at doing a marketing agency. And ultimately, what I ended up realizing that the operations was a really like underserved area and on the STR space. There's a lot of people that are out there telling people like how you need to run operations. But what I have come to learn is that you can't copy paste someone's business to another business. I know that sounds almost perfect, but when you get in there, Sam, you have different opinions than I do. There may be something where I'm like, this is how I run my business. But then when it comes to you, you run it completely different. And so there's no way you could copy my process exactly to your process because we have a difference of opinion on, how we solve a problem with a guest or maybe how we handle an owner. And so that's where I come in with a lot of my clients and I look at what they're doing and I customize the solution to their business and how to build those processes. Or sometimes they just don't know if they would just do more upfront and like preventative, they won't have some of those issues they're seeing downstream. And that's what I see with a lot of operators. They're reactionary. They're having to respond. And so going back to my story here, as I started with this operator, I started putting in processes upstream. So we started working on building tech software for maintenance and cleaning. We started working on having multiple cleaners on staff. We started working on really getting a team of VAs all across the globe, not just from the Philippines, which was really popular 5 years ago. We had actual VAs from Central America who were fantastic because we were in Texas. They could speak Spanish. So there was that nice little connection that we had there. And then we even had it to the point to where my Central American VAs were actually running my maintenance and cleaning because a lot of my cleaners did not speak English. They only spoke Spanish. So it was just a natural flow to where we bolstered our business. At the same time, we were providing a better experience for our guests because now we were communicating on the right wavelengths with everybody amongst the team. And so we took that portfolio from 75 listings up to 156 within 8 months. And most people think that was crazy. It was. We broke a lot of things and we screwed up a lot on the way to 156. And so that's where I pull from a lot of my experience where I learned like where are the phases that you start running into issues. So there's phases in this business, like from 0 to 20. It feels great. You feel like, it's all on your shoulders. But once you start getting past 20 properties, you get up to 30, 40, you're stressed because you're trying to keep up with everything. And then there's the next phase around 60 properties. Then the game changes. And I will say I'll change one more time at 100 properties. And then once you get past 150, it's a completely different animal because now you actually have an established team. You're executing. And that's where I really see where operators are kind of underserved because you either have people that are teaching the guys who are from 0 to 5, that brand new person getting out of their W-2, or they're somewhere in between, that 5 to 20, and they're trying to put in the systems and processes, but it's really heavily reliant on the founder or the main person. Or they have one really solid VA who is their catch-all and does everything. And it just becomes this like pushback as they keep trying to grow. They just feel like they can't grow because they feel like their systems aren't keeping up now with their growth.
I find that fascinating because as someone who you see probably a lot those different stages and what they struggle with in those stages, and I mean, it's very similar to most businesses, which is when you're small, it's primarily, the entrepreneur who's making it work. They don't have a lot of cash flow. They're just trying to do everything. Then once you start to get middle sized, you start to have some cash flow, and now you're able to hire some help, but not like a lot of help, and maybe not A players or the right team, but like some, and then you get a little bit bigger, and there's a lot of different challenges along the way. So maybe to touch back a little bit more on what you said there, maybe if you could just be a little bit more specific and kind of what you see, like what I noticed you say you typically work with people who have more than 20 properties. So 20 plus, like what do you see are the main categories of vacation rental manager size, and what are the biggest things they struggle with at each size, and then how do you help them solve those?
Yeah. So the reason why you generally pick the ones that are right around 20 is because I've worked with the smaller operators. Don't get me wrong. It's very hard for them to separate me as their strategy coach and giving them the direction versus wanting to use me as a VA. And I don't like under delivering with my clients. And so that's why I've kind of stepped up to the ones who are above the 20 properties because they're trying to actively grow. And generally the ones that are under 20, they could grow or they may not. I've encountered clients who have been at 15 properties for 5+ years and they say they want to grow, but then when I step into their operation to help them and restructure and put in the systems and processes, I've also had those same type of clients just vanish. They want to go and travel, and I get that. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's where you want to be. That's not a good use of my services. And that's where I kind of define that with my clients. And I'm never opposed to talking to someone who's under 20, but I want to know like where's their vision? Where do they really want to go? Are they prepared to make the sacrifices? Because I've also had clients who they pay themselves handsomely and that takes away from their operational budget. And so when it comes time to make those hard decisions, they really struggle to make that call. So, when I say for these different phases, so right around 20 to 30 properties, you're going to be facing one of two things. You've hired some help. You're terrified of the overhead. You're terrified if you're going to survive. You haven't figured out if you're going to have departments or not inside your company. Most people don't teach this, but they're usually looking at a VA agency. And that's where I come in and I teach them like VA agencies are great. They have a value in this industry. But I also teach my clients like you can hire directly, but you've got to be able to train them to your systems and your processes. And if you expect a VA agency to come into your business and train your team for your systems, your processes, sadly, that's going to be very painful because they can train them to the VA agency. But when they get into your business and you have custom systems or processes, or you're expecting them to write SOPs for your company, it's going to be very, very hard. And I've talked with enough V agencies over the years where they've even seen a value in my services because I come in and I establish those systems and those processes for the company. And then their VAs are much easier for them to come in and actually execute. And so it actually
Totally.
becomes a way for where we can even play off of each other. But again, that's one pain point is labor force. The second pain point that I see is not understanding their finances. And so there becomes a level there in between 20 and 30 properties where you have to quit being defensive with your homeowners or your investors. And there is a lot of PMs out there who do get defensive when their clients call them. And I understand because you're doing a lot. I mean, you're not only having to deal with the guest, you're also having to deal with the homeowner slash investor. And, most people, they prefer the investors because they just want to see the paycheck at the end of the month. Whereas the homeowners, this is their baby. So this is going to be their second property, most likely. And they're going to be a little bit more heavily involved. And there's got to be a way you have to communicate with them. And they only want to talk to one person. They don't want to talk to your VAs or someone else on the team. The relationship is with you, the founder. You're going to want to talk to you and keep that relationship. And that's important too, because that is a unique feature of your business is having that relationship. And so, if they ever wanted to invest again, you want to keep that relationship. But eventually you want to have a team where they could be passed off and the owners can build a relationship with one individual in amongst your team. Starting out, that's the founder. As you grow, you can bring in different people to help with that, but you want to make sure they're willing to go out there and build that relationship with your homeowners and investors. And that's another critical piece. The other side is growth, right? So they're also trying to grow, but they have no idea how to grow successfully. So they're usually taking whatever comes in and, they have no assessment of new properties. They see a property and they'll estimate, oh, that's going to make 50,000. Bring it on in. But they didn't do any evaluation of the client. So is this client going to be easy to work with? Are they going to be complicated? What about the property? Is it in good condition? Or am I going to be spending a lot of money fixing it, maintaining it? And then that's the other side of this too, is what package are you offering your clients? Everyone talks about a percentage package. They talk about, hey, 20%, 15%, 10%, some 30%. Well, what do you offer in these packages? That's what your clients are going to want to know. And then what are your competitors offering? Do you even know your competitors in the market? And that's a fun experience to go through with my clients because you have different departments. You're going to mainly have a sales department. You're going to have an operations department, and then you're going to have a finance department. Those are kind of your three core pillars of your company. And when you look at the finance, you're going to want to have that P&L ready to go for your clients. At the same time, you're going to want to understand your cost per reservation. There's a lot of people that talk about finances, they talk about costs, and they hear that, they freak out because they think that's a really scary comment. But then this is also going to go back into your revenue management. And most founders are the ones who are doing their revenue management. They don't have anyone at the point doing listing optimization, nor do they understand it. They're hoping AI can fix it. Then we start looking at operations. They may or may not have a team. They may rely on a few cleaners or teams that are like specific to them or maybe related to them in some way, or, just have a relationship there, but they've never considered to look outside of that current relationship for other vendors, which could save them cost on cleaning, which can make them more competitive, or reaching out to HVAC companies, electricians, plumbers, thinking preventative. So that way they know who's working 24/7. If they have an emergency plumbing issue, who do you call? Well, find that out before it happens, things like that. And then you get over into the sales and do you have a sales window? Sam, you found me on LinkedIn, and funny enough, I only started being consistent on LinkedIn really about 4 months ago. And so, and I tell people, I'm like, I've always wanted to do it. I finally made a decision, just be very, very consistent. And so, and it's like, where are you most likely to find your clients? Is it in the Facebook groups? Is it on Instagram? Is it on LinkedIn? Wherever that's at. And if it's working for you, go all in, put all your energy into that because there's 1,000 different ways to acquire clients. But I would tell you that it's better that you focus on one area instead of trying to do everything like most small operators are trying to do.
Okay, and what for let's say we have a small operator listening to this right now, and they've mostly been through referrals. Say they have maybe 10, 15 properties, and they're kind of plateaued. What would you say, like, what would you recommend for them? to do, like as far as sales or to start growing reliably again, how would you recommend or what would the first steps be for them and where should they go to start getting more sales?
The very first thing I would tell them to do is to look at who are your direct competitors in the markets you're operating in. I would also tell them don't try to run to a bunch of different markets. Grow in one market first and get yourself to where you're sitting about 25 to 30 properties in one specific market. Then you can consider a different market. So when I say market, think of like a city. So I'll pick on a city here, say Washington, D.C. That's a pretty tough market just because of what's happening around that actual city. But you also have multiple states there. The way to do it is focus on that one city that you're going to grow in and say, okay, I'm going to try to get to 25. Well, here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to immediately reach out to local realtors. I'm going to look at my top realtors who's been selling the most properties in the last 6 months. I'm going to reach out to them. I'm going to, say, hey, can I come in, and I'm not trying to compete on sales, not willing to steal your clients. I want to be a recommendation for you. I want to be able to provide value. If you guys come across investors or clients who are looking to do the STR game, I'd love to be considered. Here's a threefold pamphlet. Maybe you take them, bring them lunch or their entire office lunch, because again, your best option is to go to the realtors who are building that relationship with their clients. They're going to be the easiest way for you to get that referral to that client. Then from there, I'd even say like, hey, they also have to get continuing education. You can easily put together a continuing education class about safety with vacation rentals. There's a great name out there in the space. His name's Justin Ford. A little shout out to him. You can easily take his course, highly recommend it through the Breezeway software, and get yourself trained on safety, and then go teach these realtors to what to look for when it comes to safety, because it only benefits the entire industry for us to be safe. And I think it's so critical for us to be teaching realtors, before they recommend a property for short-term rental or vacation rental, make sure they know, like, is there any risk here for safety issues? And so you can give them a quick checklist to look for, decking, railing, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide, is there egress for the guest to get out of the bedroom, or they have a bedroom inside the house that has no windows. Well, legally, you shouldn't operate that as a bedroom just in case there's a fire. All these little things come into play, but also maybe they want to put a hot tub on a deck that's not got the actual structural foundation to be supporting that weight of not just the hot tub, but also the water. What's it going to take to get it certified? There's a lot of little things you want to think about, or maybe don't put it on the deck, maybe put it on the lower ground. But, if you're in a beach location, you're going to have those hurricane windows and those hurricane doors. Sometimes the certain doors won't support the smart locks. How are you going to work through that? And so it's little things like this you have to kind of think through when you're working with these realtors, but being able to come out there and show them like how you're thinking forward, this is how you're going to get those introductions to new potential properties.
I love that. Partnerships, referrals, getting people who will get you leads can be one of the highest leverage things you can do. So I love that idea, and I've heard it a couple times, but it's good to hear you break it out a lot more and get a lot more specific about how to do it. And safety, I think that's a great idea to do those safety classes as well. And then how would you say it's different for, let's say they're at 100 or 150 properties, say they want to grow to 200 or 250. How is that kind of growth game different? Or is it at all? Is it just more of the same?
Yeah, I mean, at 150, their game is probably going to change a little bit because they're probably at that point starting to send out mailers. So they probably employed a few different CRMs or marketing avenues that they're trying to run. So they might be running ads. And again, there's lists out there, and you can buy lists and actually search property owners and secondary owners or second home owners. So you can go out there and you can find those, and that's something you would look at as you get bigger like that. But I would also tell you, I would still rely heavily on your foundations of your realtors, because they are going to be the ones who know the right people. They're going to be the relationships. And then if you want to go one step further at those bigger sizes, you should be building partnerships with your local companies, because those companies are going to also be how you drive demand in some of your off seasons, because corporate housing, retreats, thinking about like That's going to get your name out there. They're going to remember that. Oh man, I'm thinking about buying a property, or I've heard someone's going to buy a property. Well, the more eyes you have coming into your company and are experiencing a stay at your property, the better it's going to help you grow that business further. Your local chamber of commerce is another great avenue because they're going to be recommending you. And again, it's just putting yourself in the community and being heavily involved in the communities that you're working in. And it may not be that you can be in every area at the same time, but also think about how you can send business back to local businesses in the area, living like a local. Those businesses, when they hear about an investor or they're meeting somebody, they're going to have their bulletin boards. It's ways to, circularly reference each other. You're sending clientele to them, they're sending potential clientele to you.
I love that. It's such a guerrilla mentality where it's like find the relationships and the value in as many places as you can and both provide as much value as you can and see where you can get value with other people and relationships and the government companies. I think that's brilliant. And that's the kind of thing that compounds too. It's not like, for example, I do ads, you spend money in, you get certain results out, but it doesn't necessarily compound over time. You might get some effects for becoming a local celebrity. Like there's some things that do, but for the most part what you're talking about compounds, and it might be slow at first, but it's something that hosts and or property managers can do to over time grow, and I think that's awesome. Now one thing I've been thinking about is in your bio you talk about how you actually took a client from 150 properties down to, or units down to 60, and you did that to improve their profit, which like is completely counterintuitive. Almost everybody's like, yeah, I want to go from 60 to 150 so I can have the cash flow to be profitable. So can you explain to me how did that actually work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's actually a couple of different scenarios that happen in that equation. So one, getting to 150 was not the problem. The problem was the systems and the processes were not set up to sustain the 150. It was set up to sustain a much smaller portfolio. And so you start thinking about this. At 150 properties, you're pretty much taking on pretty much anything that's coming your way. And that's fine. But what I ended up doing was I went through and I rated all of his owners, right? And so I gave them a classification, A, B, or C. Players were like, I love this owner. I will never fire them. My B owners, like, I'm not mad at them, but they're a good owner. They don't really bother me. I definitely want to keep them there. My C owner's like, okay, this person's always nagging me. This person is really stressing me out. And I'm spending 80% of my time with this client, and I'm only getting a 20% return. So it's the law of 80-20. Wherever you're spending, 20% of your efforts is probably making 80% of your revenue. And wherever you're spending 80% of your time, it's probably only bringing in that 20% of your revenue, which is just not worth it. That's first thing. But then do one more layer deep from that. Go ahead and rate the properties. Are these an A property? My maintenance costs are low. I never have cleaning issues. Everything just hums for this property. That's my A property. It may not be luxury. It can be a mid-tier B property, but if you're not having maintenance issues or cleaning issues there, I would tell you don't write that off. That may be a just pure revenue driver for your company and can be a real backbone to your revenue. Then you have your B properties. B properties they're still, they might be a luxury property. They might be a run of the mill property. They may be a tiny home, but they're just printing money. Yes, there's some maintenance issues. There's probably some cleaning issues. There's a few little nuances to it, but it's still keeping your portfolio operational and bringing in revenue. And then you're going to have your C properties. C properties is where you're spending a ton of time, a ton of energy, and spending a lot of money trying to keep it operational. So you need to look at this from all three points of view, not just from your client's perspective, but also from the property level. And then most people, they'll say, oh, well, this client brought me 4 properties. But if they're all C level properties, well, you're spending a lot of money in maintenance costs, cleaning costs, other vendor costs. Well, in reality, it may not be making you any money. I had a friend who was operating out of Idaho, and she had this property of like 13 units with this one client. And we were talking through it, and she had a background in accounting. And I told her, I said, you're really stressed out about these properties. Why don't you run the numbers and see what you're really bringing your take home pay every month? Well, when she ran the numbers and actually ran all her costs from her tech to everything, she was only bringing in $100 per door. Well, she fired them, and happily, because it just wasn't worth the effort. Yeah, the money seemed nice over the gross revenue and what she was bringing in, but when you ran the numbers on her cost, it wasn't worth her time for the headache and the frustration she was enduring. And so this is where I say it's critical you understand, the clients were beating her up for where she was operating remotely, but then at the same time, she was having issues finding a good cleaner. And then on top of that, the properties constantly had maintenance issues, cleaning issues. And it was like the stress and pressure you're under, it just doesn't add up. And then when we finally got to the cost per or the revenue per property, it didn't make sense. It no longer was viable. So when they came to her and said, hey, you know what, maybe we should split pass, she agreed because she realized I'm not making enough to make it worth my time. And so sometimes you do need to do that. And you should do this at least once a year on your entire portfolio. You need to make sure that the portfolio is performing. I had another client, similar story. He actually went out there with his brother-in-law. They were working on this property. They were out there manually doing manual labor in a canal, actually down in Florida, and working, clearing out the canal where wood had accumulated, working on the dock. They had a trampoline, in-ground trampoline that was full of water. They were draining that, picking that out, filling it in, doing yard work. Well, when we came to run the numbers, he had almost $6,000 of basically maintenance costs that he's poured into the property out of the 20 grand it had made. Well, when you run that out, okay, so he made 14 grand, but then the clients were constantly taking the property on peak holidays. There was all these issues with the clients. They were talking about tearing the property down and rebuilding it. And I was like, well, when is that going to happen? And when you finally step back and you look at the entire picture, you realize this isn't worth our time. And so that client left his portfolio. He was not upset because he knew his numbers. And that was his first client that really stepped away from him. So he was a little bit upset at first, but when we finally ran through the numbers, it was like, that's okay. We can let that client walk.
I love that. Love that. What I'm seeing more and more is the quality of the company is dependent on the quality of their clients. Their clients. And I was talking with a buddy of mine. I went to lunch last week with him, and that was his whole focus. Was he was like, I'm in the middle of firing my bad clients and trying to go up market to find better clients. And anybody that I know that is really doing well, it's because they're serving really amazing people and that their clients are hardworking. And like to relate this to the space like you were just talking about, if your owners are taking all of the holidays and all the peak times and then they blame you for not hitting the revenue numbers that they're looking for, like there's nothing you can do to make anyone happy. So yeah, I see that a lot as well. I think that's a great insight there. So that kind of makes me wonder if there was one problem that you could solve, just like let's say everyone was your client, all the vacation rental marketing companies were your clients, and there's one thing you could solve for all of them. You could wave a magic wand and it would just be fixed for everybody. What would that problem be, and why?
Business mapping. And I know that sounds probably a really weird answer, but I'll explain. Most of my clients have never considered an org chart. They've never considered figuring out what tasks are important for which role. KPIs don't exist. And if I could map each of their businesses perfectly, they would know out of that map what systems they need, what processes they're going to have per system, and who's responsible with the correct KPIs. And there's a big push right now in the industry on AI. And there's one thing that nobody actually is thinking about with AI. AI is great in a lot of ways. It is like a brand new employee also, and you have to train it and treat it like a new employee. But also, AI is only going to amplify your systems and your processes. So if your systems and processes are broken, AI is just going to amplify that to the 10th power. And it is going to be frustrating because you're thinking that you're hiring AI to fix your problems. But if your problems is really at the core, you don't have good systems, you don't have good processes, you barely have SOPs. And those are different, by the way. They're not the same thing. I know people use SOPs. You need SOPs for everything. You do need SOPs, but for only specific things that need like the how to. It's better that you understand that you need a process with specific SOPs that select steps. And this is where a lot of people struggle because they try to document everything. And like, oh, they use the example of McDonald's. But this is where I tell people, like, what you don't understand is McDonald's has not got SOPs everywhere. They have a process with SOPs built in to that process because there's a step. You know, if you look at it from a sales perspective, when someone reaches out to you for contact, for example, like, Sam, I'm going to call you to be my PM, you know, the very first thing is, how do I get a hold of you? Maybe it's a Calendly link or whatever. I'm booking a time with you. But then there's an email that goes out, and your process is you sent multiple emails out, like what to expect, all these things. It's a really good process you have built out. But most people, what they'll do is they'll wait for that calendar link. They don't send any follow up prior to the call. But then you say, hey, I'm going to have an SOP where there's an email that goes out prior to the call. Here's what the email looks like. Here's what time it should go out prior to the call. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 2 hours. And here's my template. So this way, me or any of my team members can execute this in the future. Because that's the idea, is that if you want to replace yourself to have a team, you've got to be able to get everything out of your head and into a format that people can follow the directions. And I would also tell people, don't be so bold to think that you've been operating in this space for a couple years, right? Well, don't be so bold to expect a VA to come into your business on day one and just fix everything. That's unrealistic. I know everybody wants that, and it's going to be the same
Yes.
as true with AI. Yes, some of the AI is trained on specific items, but it is not going to fix all your issues. That is your responsibility as the founder to know what systems, what processes, and SOPs your company wants to follow.
Well, I want to zoom in a little bit there. What tools do you use, number one, for, helping you with creating SOPs, if any? It depends on the SOP, I guess. Some are more complex, some are less. What tools do you use? And then on the AI side as well, what tools are you leaning on right now or are excited about AI wise for operations?
Sure. One of the first tools I teach a lot of my clients is Notebook LM. It is a free tool from Google. Most people have heard it, they've seen it populate, but they don't understand how to use it in operations. So I'm going to go ahead and spill the beans and share with everybody today. The cool thing with Notebook LM is, okay, you're going to take on a new property, right? Well, the problem with taking on a new property is you've got to do some things to take it on. You've got to walk through the property. You've got to see what everything's in the property. Is there any nuances to the property? Well, I'm going to show you a way really quickly how you can do this. So take your phone, turn on your voice recorder, and literally walk through the property and record yourself documenting everything. Look, open the microwave. What's the serial number and the part numbers? What's about the oven? What about the fridge? You know, where's the water heater stored at? And just talk through it. Just have a conversation with your phone like you're talking to someone, explaining them how the property looks, what the light switches do at each space. And what you're going to do with this voice recording once you're done is you're going to upload it to Notebook LM. You have just created the best friend for your entire team, because now you have a property AI documented inside that Notebook LM notebook that can actually pull out the part numbers, can pull out whatever specific that property. Your VAs can go in there and ask questions to that notebook, and you've just created a resource that is invaluable to your team. And not only that, Notebook LM can actually go out on the web and search for documents related to those items, and you can create infographics. And so think about, instead of having to get a creative designer to make an infographic about how to work the fireplace, as an example, because it's maybe a gas fireplace. Well, now you can have an infographic that's created from you recording and explaining how it's working. And then at the same time, you can also have Notebook LM go out and search for the part manual or the owner's manual or whatever and bring that in. And now you have a completely trained, self-sustaining AI that is going to be for your team. And you deliver that to your new people. Say, whatever your question is, feel free to ask here. Or if you're training another AI to help with guest comms, you can use Notebook LM as your launch platform. So you start here, you build SOPs, and then you throw it into your other AI that you're using. Maybe it's for guest communications, maybe it's for maintenance, whatever. You've now built yourself a timeless solution inside your company.
That was awesome. I appreciate that. That is very actionable. But yeah, if I was an operator right now, I would 100% be doing that for all my properties right now. Like that would save so much time. And I can see. Wow, that was crazy. In just a few minutes, you showed us like some of the value. I'm sure that some of your clients, just a little piece of the value your clients get. So that was really cool. I'm gonna use that a lot more. I have used it a little bit, just for marketing stuff and sales processes, things like that, but not nearly enough. So that is really really cool. I appreciate that. I'm curious, what is the worst operational disaster you walked into? You don't have to name names, but like what is the worst kind of operation system that you've been asked to help with and it was just kind of a nightmare?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go back to my beginning story, where I started partnering with a guy with 75 properties. So it's also the place where I learned a lot. But at that time, he had two cell phones. He was always on the phone. He did not have nights and weekends. Basically, if you invited him and his family over for dinner, within a few minutes, we used to do board games with him before I started working with him. Within probably about 10 minutes of the board game start, he'd be up on the phone walking away. And then we'd have to call him back over while he was on the phone to play his turn. And again, he was using Smart B&B. He had no systems, he had no processes, he had some automated messaging, and then beyond that, it was him. And he hired a VA to help him with Smart B&B, and that VA was very expensive. So he did not have a lot of extra funds to go hire and build everything out. What I ended up having to figure out was, he had a bunch of cleaners, and his cleaners were basically people who just got in the industry because they couldn't find any other work. So they didn't have any procedure on how to clean. They had no checklist. It was just kind of a free for all across his portfolio. So I had to step back and say, okay, where is the best value for me to help you? And I focused first on his vendors, and I focused on his cleaning teams. I focused on his handyman, and I focused on finding at least 3 to 4 different companies for HVAC, plumbing, electrical issues, you name it. Why did I do that? Well, I believe that if you are someone who is a real estate agent or you're in this industry as a property manager, you should be able to find at least 3 quotes per job. That sounds crazy. Sometimes you can do it, but because of the speed that we have to operate, you're not always going to be able to get 3 quotes. But by at least doing that, or at least saying that you requested a quote, and maybe it comes in 2 days after you actually needed it, the thing is, at least you attempted to do right financially by your client. The other side of doing this too is that you'll also learn which vendors you're probably going to end up relying on the most and that you're wanting to partner with because they're the most reliable. And at the same time, this is where some of that preventative comes in, because now you're going to start reaching out to vendors who's available 24/7, really, who says they are, but they're not really available, who's actually going to have your back in a situation when something arises, and also represent your company well when they go to the property. All things to consider. And once you kind of realize like your vendor support is the backbone of your business, you'll realize that that's probably the number one area that you need to focus your energies. Because once I fixed that, it was very easy for us within 8 months to go to 156, because I had a process to find vendors. I had every vendor sign a statement of work with me. They knew how my payment process worked. They knew, I had a cleaner who literally called us up and said, my cleaner forgot to take photos. I know I'm not going to get paid for the job because we had a contract. And if you didn't send photos, you don't get paid. There was no argument. It was clearly lined out, and none of our cleaners did we hold hostage that way. That was not the intent. The intent was to protect them. And so at that time, 5 years ago, people weren't really big on pictures. But the reason why we pushed it is because that's how we were fighting the insurance claims. That's how we were fighting with the guests when the guests tried to report that our cleaners didn't do their job. That's how we were proving to owners that we were taking care of their properties. That was how we also made sure when someone tried to claim there was a camera on the property that the cleaner left it, we fought that. We had all of these issues occur over time, but once we started showing photos, well, it was like the guest flipped the script. Now they could no longer say, hey, well, we have this cleaning report that says otherwise. Can you show us where? If we missed it in the cleaning report, we're happy to take on responsibility. Owners loved it because we started emailing them at the same time the cleaning was done. Now, this was pretty bold. We actually emailed our cleaning reports directly to our owners as soon as they were completed. So the owners knew the property was cleaned and they could see the whole PDF document, photos included, and our checklist.
And that didn't cause issues because if there's an owner that's a little bit more perfectionist, I'd assume there might be some issues there.
Yeah, so sometimes with those type of but remember, you're going to rate that owner. And when they're acting that way, on the next phase of when you're planning to shorten your list of your portfolio, they're gone. And so there, it does twofold for you. It also identifies those owners who are, super perfectionists. Because I did have an owner who would get a tape measure out and measure where their couch was in their property. And they would send me pictures. You're 2 inches too far to the right. And I'm like, really? But here's what we ended up doing. I kept working with her and I used her as a resource for me specifically to get better as an operator. Well, how could I make sure my cleaners were doing this every time? How could I make sure that my cleaners were upholding my standards? Okay, so maybe we missed it a few times. Well, how critical is that for the guest? So then I started realizing like, rating these issues that the owner's bringing. So maybe it's more so their personal requirements, but as far as my team went, we got to the point of we were so good. I didn't hear from them all the time about those items. Every now and then I would hear something and I would appreciate it because I was not so bold that I was catching every issue. Sometimes the owners like to review those reports and they're going to catch something you or your team missed. You should thank them because the whole point of doing this is full transparency. So if they catch something that you missed, well, maybe you need to turn that in for a claim. Well, you would not have had time to turn it in when you found it on the next turnover. And so it almost makes the owner like another set of eyes that only helps
Yeah.
you be better. And at the same time, it also it'll help prevent guest issues because you think about something's broken and it showed up in the report, but you or your team missed it and the owner catches it. All right, now we can file a claim. We can get that fixed before the next guest. Or the other guest has already arrived. We're reaching out saying, we're so sorry we caught this late. We're going to go ahead and fix it unless you would rather us fix it after your stay.
Okay, that's brilliant. I love that. That is really, really cool. But another thing that I find this is like coming from someone who's in the software world, or I came from software. I worked at a company called IntelliHost, which was a software and optimization software platform. I'm always curious when I'm talking to operators, what is your recommended tech stack? Like what tools do you prefer? And primarily just the big ones, like what PMS software do you typically prefer and why? Guest messaging software. Like what are the main softwares you typically use and recommend?
Yeah, so I mean, I've worked with a lot of them at this point. PMS switches are hard. I don't care how prepared you are, they're hard. And most of the time when I'm speaking with a client, they're either going through a PMS switch, they need help with the PMS switch, or they've just finished a PMS switch and everything's messed up. The thing that I tell my clients is get good at what you have in your back pocket right now. And a lot of the times the software they have, they're not using correctly or fully. So it's not so much about picking the right tech stack as it is what is it they need? And did they really need to bolt on all this other tech to achieve that when there's a native solution in their PMS? Or the reason why they had to bolt it on is because the native solution is not working well and they're now having to add cost. So go back to the original reason why you have this tech and write out like what would be your ideal PMS. And so this is what I do with a lot of my clients. I'll actually take them through a worksheet that I've created that we look at. Okay, let's compare all the PMSs you've looked at. What is a must-have number one thing that you need? You obviously need a channel manager to be able to be on the different websites, the OTAs. From that, we need to know that we have an integrated inbox, and that means including email. There's a lot of PMSs that do not include the email integration. So if you don't have that, what does that mean for you? And how does that change your operation? I've worked with some PMSs who've been in the space for quite a while, and they even know they don't have the email integration, and it's been 6 years, and they haven't fixed it. And I'm like, that's crazy to me, but I understand that if that is a problem and that is a issue that your team is having, what solutions exist out there that do fix that? Then go a little bit deeper. Is it the reporting you want? Is it the automations you want that are built in natively? Or is it that, you want something kind of around your vendor support that you can have natively? There's not a lot of options that have that natively in there that are going to be very good. So that's the reason why there is specific software for specific solutions, but understand what that cost is going to be up front. If you switch to, I'll pick on Guesty. Guesty is one of the big guys in our space, and they have a native like Breezeway Lite in their space. They tell you it's a Breezeway Lite, but it's not going to have the abilities of Breezeway itself. At the same time, they have their own kind of revenue management or pricing style inside of Guesty. It is not going to be the same as a wheelhouse or a price slabs. So understand what you're getting, and is it really worth the cost? Or are you going to have to tack on your custom solutions? Well, evaluate that when you're negotiating that PMS with them. Like if I'm using Hostfully, for example, Hostfully just got a massive investment to invest in AI. Exciting times. But I'm probably going to bolt on something like a Bestie AI or a Host Buddy. Okay, well, that's going to take care of my communications to some degree. But then, if I'm going to go back to, say, a Guesty and I'm going to do that, well, I also have that phone system, Alaware, or see, I forget the other system, but that natively integrate with Guesty to align with the reservation. Well, with that said, I can use something like a Host Buddy that integrates with OpenPhone and also assigns the phone number to the guest reservation. So do I really need a Guesty now? If I can use a Host Buddy to do those two things, and now Host Buddy won't do the full phone call, but you could easily have an automated message texted to the guest. Hey, if you need faster reply, text this number. And then you can allow Host Buddy to help you take over and get that guest the help they need, especially if it's late at night and there's nobody online. Now, granted, you still got to train Host Buddy. That doesn't stop, but there's some options here where you can switch out, what makes sense for your operation. And I don't tell anyone to go any one solution, because every operation I've encountered at this point, they've created their PMS, or they have the PMS they're using for a certain reason. And oftentimes it is because of one specific item. And then I have to ask the question, well, is that really needed? Generally, when I do a contract with a client, it's usually a 90-day sprint. And most of the time the conversation revolves around, they're like, hey, should I switch tech? And I'm like, well, stop. First, let's see what you're actually using and what we can get rid of. And let's reduce that cost first. And then if we need to consider a PMS switch, let's evaluate it with the spreadsheet, kind of line it up, like what's the needed and then what PMS offers, makes sense. And then obviously looking at cost as well, because at the end of the day, when you're in your off season and you have $1,000 bill from your PMS just for the tech, you really need to evaluate, is that really the best solution?
Wow, I like that. I think I am guilty of that as well, which is shiny object syndrome. Right? When you're in
We
operations, you
all
realize, yeah, right. You realize the issue is the bottleneck, but we want to make the issue something cool or something new or something shiny. And we're like, man, if I could just get a new PMS, or I could just get a new messaging system, I really think I'll be doing so much better if I could just have this. And it's like, oh, that's not the bottleneck. And that's, yeah, it's a great reminder. So I really appreciate that. And I also want to be mindful of your time as well. I appreciate you coming on and sharing all this expertise. This was very, very valuable. I'm going to try and blast this to as many property managers I know, because this is just absolutely value driven content. But before we wrap up, how do people find you, and how do they work with you? How do these property managers get in touch?
Yeah, obviously they can find me on LinkedIn as well, but our website is gettheghost with an S at the end.com. And we were talking about it earlier. I was working through that. I've been working on that a few weeks. I had a website up and live for many, many months, and I broke it with some new AI tools. So I'm just as guilty as anybody with the shiny tools. And I recently had a potential client reach out to me and sent a screenshot of my website, which completely shocked me because I did not realize it had gone live. It is up, it is working, and would love for anybody to reach out there. And if you don't hear back from us, you can also reach me at Cody at gettheghosthosts.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.